Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you happened on one of the darkest nights of my military career. Every day on this channel, I bring you real stories from my 25 years of service. And today, I'm going to share one of the most intense rescue operations I ever led. A mission that came down to 6 hours, 15 kilometers of hostile territory, and a wounded pilot whose life hung in the balance. This is Operation Midnight Eagle, and I'm telling you right now, don't click away from this video, because what happened that night in Afghanistan will keep you on the edge of your seat. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button if you appreciate real military stories. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss these operations, and drop a comment below. I read every single one and love hearing from fellow veterans and military enthusiasts. My name is Steve Harris, former Sergeant Major with 25 years under my belt, and this story takes place during one of my deployments to Afghanistan, back when things were heating up in the region. I was attached to a special operations unit. Can't give you all the details about the unit designation, but let's just say we were the guys they called when conventional forces couldn't handle the job. It was October, and the mountain air in that part of Afghanistan had that bite to it that cuts right through your gear. We'd been operating out of a forward operating base for about 3 months, conducting reconnaissance missions and disrupting enemy supply lines. The Taliban had been getting more aggressive in our sector, and intelligence suggested they were planning something big. What we didn't know was that in less than 6 hours, I'd be leading my team into the most dangerous rescue mission of my career. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was 2147 hours. That's 9:47 p.m. for you civilians. And I was in the command bunker reviewing patrol routes for the next day when Lieutenant Colonel Morrison burst through the door. Now, Morrison was not a guy who got rattled easily. 20-year veteran had seen action in Iraq, cool as ice under pressure. But that night, his face was pale and his jaw was set in that way that told me we had a serious problem. "Steve," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. "We've got a bird down. F-16 Fighting Falcon went dark about 30 minutes ago during a reconnaissance run over the Kunar Valley. Last contact was at coordinates 347892211. Pilot managed to eject, and we've got intermittent contact with him on his survival radio." My stomach dropped. The Kunar Valley was bad news. Taliban stronghold with terrain that could swallow a man whole. Rocky, mountainous, with caves and hiding spots that had been used by fighters for decades. If our pilot was down in that sector, he was in serious trouble. "What's his status?" I asked, already running through extraction scenarios in my head. "Captain Jake Morrison. No relation to me, by the way. 28 years old, been flying combat missions for 3 years. He's reporting injuries, sounds like a busted leg, and possible concussion from the ejection. But here's the real problem, Steve. Intelligence suggests there's a significant Taliban presence in that area. They heard the crash, and they're mobilizing to find him." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that every soldier knows, that moment when you realize lives are on the line and the clock is ticking. "How long do we have?" "Sunrise is at 06:30. That gives us about 6.5 hours before they'll have full visibility of the area. After that, any rescue attempt becomes a suicide mission. The terrain is too open, too exposed. It's now or never. 6.5 hours to plan, insert, locate, and extract a wounded pilot from 15 kilometers inside hostile territory. In the civilian world, that might sound like plenty of time. In the military world, especially for this kind of operation, it was barely enough. Morrison continued the briefing. "I need you to put together a team. Small, fast, experienced. This isn't a job for rookies. The insertion point is here." He pointed to a spot on the map. "About 3 clicks from the crash site. Blackhawks will take you in, but they can't stay. Too much ground fire potential. You'll have to hump it to the target, find Morrison and get him to the extraction point here." His finger moved to another spot on the map. Extraction window opens at 500 and closes at 5:30. Miss that window and you're stuck there until the next night. I studied the map, my mind already working through the logistics. 15 kilometers of rough terrain at night, with unknown enemy positions between us and our objective, and we'd be carrying a wounded man on the way out. It was the kind of mission that separates the professionals from the wannabes. "I'll need my usual crew," I said. "Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, and Jackson. 5-man teams should be able to move fast enough. Whatever you need, Steve, but I need an answer now. Are you taking this mission?" I didn't hesitate. That's not how we operate. When a fellow service member is in trouble, you don't debate the risks. You calculate them, you plan around them, but you don't let them stop you. "We're going in, Colonel. Give me 30 minutes to brief my team and check equipment." As I left the command bunker, my mind was already shifting into mission mode. 25 years in the Army teaches you to compartmentalize emotions and focus on the task at hand. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't feeling the weight of what we were about to attempt. Captain Morrison was somebody's son, maybe somebody's husband or father. He'd put his life on the line, flying missions to protect us ground pounders, and now it was our turn to return the favor. I found Rodriguez first. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez was our team medic and one of the finest soldiers I'd ever served with. Tough as nails, steady under fire, and she could patch up a wounded soldier under conditions that would make a civilian doctor quit medicine. She was cleaning her weapon in the armory when I walked in. "We've got a live one, Rodriguez. Pilot down in the Kunar Valley. How's your aid bag?" She looked up at me with those dark eyes that had seen too much combat for someone who was only 32 years old. "Always ready, Sergeant Major. How bad is the target area?" "Bad enough. Taliban presence, rough terrain, and we've got less than 6 hours to get in and out." Rodriguez nodded and started gathering her medical supplies. No questions, no complaints. That's the kind of soldier she was. "I'll have trauma supplies ready for transport injuries. If he ejected from an F-16, he's probably banged up pretty good." Next, I tracked down Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, our communications specialist. Thompson was a tech wizard who could make radios work in conditions that would fry most equipment. British accent, former Royal Marines who transferred to work with US forces, absolutely brilliant with anything electronic. "Thompson, we're going hunting tonight. Need you to set up communications with a downed pilot and coordinate with air support." "Right then, Sergeant Major. What's the operational frequency?" He was already pulling equipment from the communications locker as he spoke. "Survival frequency 243.0 for pilot contact. Command frequency 127.8 for coordination. And Thompson, pack the long-range gear. We might need to call for emergency extraction." Sergeant Williams was our demolitions expert and heavy weapons specialist. African-American kid from Detroit who'd grown up tough and channeled that toughness into becoming one of the best explosive ordnance disposal technicians in the Army. When things went bad, Williams was the guy who could blow us a way out or lay down suppressing fire that would make the enemy keep their heads down. "Williams, we're doing a rescue mission in Indian country. Pack for bear." He grinned at me with that smile that never seemed to leave his face, even in the worst situations. "You got it, Sergeant Major. Standard loadout, or are we expecting heavy contact?" "Expect everything. This one could get messy." Finally, I found Corporal Jackson, our youngest team member at 24, but already a veteran of 3 deployments. Jackson was our scout and marksman, could hit targets at ranges that seemed impossible and move through terrain like he was part of the landscape. Quiet kid from Montana who'd grown up hunting in mountains that weren't too different from where we were headed. "Jackson, hope you brought your hiking boots. We're going for a walk in the mountains tonight." "How far, Sergeant Major?" 15 clicks each way, and we're bringing a passenger back." Jackson just nodded. He wasn't much for words, but when the shooting started, his rifle did all the talking he needed. With the team assembled, I gathered them in the briefing room and spread out the tactical maps. The next 20 minutes were crucial. This was where we'd identify potential problems and hopefully solve them before they got us killed. Listen up, people. At 20:30 hours, Captain Jake Morrison's F-16 went down in Sector 7G, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of our position. Pilot ejected successfully, but is reporting injuries. He's currently at these coordinates. I pointed to the crash site on the map, but those coordinates are approximately 4 hours old. He may have moved, seeking better cover. Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the terrain. What kind of injuries are we looking at? Possible broken leg, suspected concussion, unknown additional trauma. Be prepared for anything from minor cuts to spinal injuries. Thompson was already calculating radio ranges and plotting communication windows. Sergeant Major, the terrain is going to play havoc with radio signals. Those mountains will create dead zones. We might lose contact with the pilot for extended periods. That's why we're bringing the long-range equipment. If we lose him on survival frequency, you'll need to boost signal strength and try alternate frequencies. Williams was studying the map from a tactical perspective. What's the enemy situation? This was the part I'd been dreading. Intelligence reports significant Taliban presence in the area. They heard the crash, and they're actively searching for the pilot. We have to assume they know approximately where he went down, and they're converging on that position. Jackson looked up from the map. Insertion point looks good. Ridge line with decent cover and multiple routes to the target area. But extraction... He paused, studying the designated pickup zone. That's going to be tight, Sergeant Major. Open ground, limited cover, perfect spot for an ambush. He was right, and we all knew it. The extraction point was a compromise, close enough for the Blackhawks to get in and out quickly, but exposed enough that if the enemy was waiting for us, we'd be sitting ducks. That's why timing is critical, I said. We insert at 23:30, reach target area by Euro 200, locate the pilot by Euro 300, and start moving to extraction by Euro 330. That gives us a 90-minute buffer for complications. And if we run into those complications? Rodriguez asked. I looked each of them in the eye. These were soldiers who'd followed me through hell before, and they deserved an honest answer. Then we improvise, adapt, and overcome. But failure is not an option. Captain Morrison is counting on us, and we don't leave people behind. We spent the next hour going over equipment checks, loading magazines, and coordinating with the flight crew that would take us in. The Black Hawk pilots were veterans themselves, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen and Chief Warrant Officer Mark Davis. Both had flown dozens of insertion missions, and they knew how to get soldiers where they needed to be, even when where they needed to be was deep in enemy territory. "Sergeant Major," Chen said as we went over the flight plan, "we can get you to the insertion point, but once we drop you off, we're heading back to base. The bird will be too vulnerable sitting on the ground in that area. You'll have 30 seconds to offload, and then we're gone." "Understood. What about extraction?" Davis answered. "We'll be monitoring your radio traffic. When you call for pickup, we can be wheels up in 5 minutes and at your position in 12 minutes. But if there's active ground fire, we might have to wave off and try again. Let's make sure that doesn't happen," I said. By 2300 hours, we were loaded and ready. Each man carried approximately 60 pounds of gear: weapons, ammunition, water, medical supplies, communication equipment, and the specialized tools needed for this kind of mission. My M4 carbine was cleaned and zeroed, and I'd loaded extra magazines with a mix of standard ball ammunition and tracer rounds. Rodriguez had her medical bag, plus her own rifle. Thompson had the radio equipment and backup batteries. Williams carried extra firepower, an M249 squad automatic weapon that could lay down serious suppressing fire if we needed it. Jackson had his scoped M14 rifle for long-range precision shooting. As we walked to the flight line, I could feel that familiar pre-mission tension. It's not fear. Any soldier who's been in combat knows the difference between healthy alertness and paralyzing fear. This was the sensation of every nerve being tuned to maximum sensitivity, every sense sharpened, every part of your training coming online and ready for action. The Black Hawk's rotors were already turning when we reached the aircraft. The crew chief helped us load our equipment and double-checked our safety harnesses. As we lifted off into the Afghan night, I looked out at the mountains we'd be crossing and said a quiet prayer for Captain Morrison. He'd been on the ground for over 4 hours now, alone, injured, and hiding from enemy forces that were actively hunting him. The flight to the insertion point took 23 minutes, and every one of those minutes felt like an hour. Through my night vision goggles, I could see the Afghan landscape passing below us, jagged ridges, deep valleys, and scattered clusters of mud brick compounds where local villagers lived their lives largely untouched by the conflict swirling around them. But tonight, somewhere in those mountains, Captain Morrison was fighting for his life. Thompson had established radio contact with our downed pilot about 10 minutes into the flight. The news wasn't good. Midnight Eagle. This is Rescue 1. Thompson spoke into his headset, using the call signs we'd established. How copy? The response came through with heavy static, but Morrison's voice was clear enough. Rescue 1, this is Midnight Eagle. I copy you 5 by 5. Status is not good, over. I took the headset from Thompson. Midnight Eagle, this is Rescue 1 Actual. Report your condition and position, over. Rescue 1 Actual, I've got a compound fracture on my left leg, possible concussion, and I'm bleeding from somewhere on my head. I managed to move about 200 meters northeast from the crash site to some rocks that provide decent concealment, but I can hear voices and they're getting closer. My heart rate spiked. Midnight Eagle? What kind of voices? How many? At least 6, maybe more. They're speaking Pashto, and they've got lights, looks like flashlights, and maybe some vehicle headlights in the distance. They found the crash site about an hour ago, and they're conducting a systematic search pattern moving outward from the wreckage. This changed everything. We'd been hoping that Morrison might have several hours before enemy forces located the general area. Now it sounded like they were practically on top of him. Midnight Eagle, stay put and stay quiet. We're inbound to your location, ETA 15 minutes to insertion, then approximately 90 minutes to reach you. Can you hold that long? Roger. Rescue 1 Actual. I'm not going anywhere fast with this leg, but if they expand their search pattern much further, they're going to find me. I handed the headset back to Thompson and activated the internal communication system to talk to the flight crew. Chen, how's our approach looking? Clear so far, Sergeant Major. No ground fire, no surface-to-air missile signatures, but I'm picking up vehicle movement on the ground. Looks like 3, maybe 4 trucks moving along the valley floor, about 2 clicks south of the crash site. That confirmed Morrison's report. The Taliban weren't just conducting a casual search. They were bringing in reinforcements and organizing a proper manhunt. This was turning from a rescue mission into a race against time, with the stakes getting higher by the minute. I gathered my team around me in the cramped passenger compartment of the Black Hawk. Even with the engine noise, we could communicate using hand signals and the internal comm system. Listen up. The situation has deteriorated. Enemy forces are close to Morrison's position and conducting active search operations. We're going to have to move faster than planned, and we need to be ready for contact from the moment we hit the ground. Rodriguez checked her medical bag one more time. How bad are his injuries, really? Compound fracture of the left leg means the bone is protruding through the skin. That's serious trauma, heavy bleeding, and he's going to need immediate medical attention. Plus, he's been on the ground for over 4 hours in near freezing temperatures. He could be going into shock. Williams was studying the map with his red filtered flashlight. Sergeant Major, if they've got vehicles in the area, they might have heavy weapons, RPGs, heavy machine guns, maybe even mortars. That's why we're going in fast and quiet. Avoid contact if possible, but if we have to fight, we fight hard and we fight smart. Jackson was checking his rifle scope. But what's the moon situation? I'd already calculated this. Quarter moon, about 30% illumination. Good for us. Enough light for movement with night vision, not enough for them to spot us easily if they don't have night vision capabilities. Thompson held up his hand for attention. Sergeant Major, I'm losing radio contact with Midnight Eagle. The terrain is starting to interfere with the signal. This was exactly what we'd been afraid of. Once we inserted and started moving through the mountainous terrain, we might lose contact with Morrison entirely. We'd be navigating to his last known position and hoping he was still there when we arrived. 2 minutes to insertion, Chen's voice came through the intercom. Weather is holding steady, winds light and variable, temperature is 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Insertion point is clear of obstacles. Through the aircraft windows, I could see our destination approaching. A flat ridgeline about 3 kilometers southwest of Morrison's last known position. It wasn't ideal. We'd have preferred to insert closer, but it was the nearest location where the Black Hawk could land safely and take off again without being exposed to ground fire. 30 seconds, Davis called out. Prepare for fast offload. The Black Hawk settled onto the ridge with barely a bump. These pilots knew their business. Before the skids had fully touched down, the crew chief was sliding the door open and motioning for us to move. Go, 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 I shouted, and my team poured out of the aircraft in a practice drill that took exactly 18 seconds. As soon as Jackson's boots hit the ground, the Black Hawk was pulling power and lifting off again, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. Suddenly, the night was quiet except for the wind whistling through the rocks and the distant sound of the helicopter fading away. We were alone in hostile territory with a wounded pilot depending on us and an unknown number of enemy forces between us and our objective. I activated my night vision goggles and took a moment to orient myself with the terrain. The ridge we'd landed on provided good observation of the valley below, but it also made us visible from multiple directions. We needed to get moving. Rodriguez, check your GPS. Confirm our position. She consulted her handheld GPS unit. We're at coordinates 347874942, elevation 8,247 feet. Morrison's last known position is 2.8 kilometers northeast, bearing 045 degrees. Thompson, try to raise Midnight Eagle. Thompson extended the antenna on his long-range radio and adjusted frequencies. Midnight Eagle, this is Rescue 1. How copy? Static. He tried again, adjusting power settings and trying alternate frequencies. Still nothing. No contact, Sergeant Major. The mountains are blocking the signal. We're going to have to get closer before we can re-establish communication. This was the moment when 25 years of experience told me to trust my instincts and lead from the front. All right, people, we're going to move fast and quiet. Jackson, you've got point. Williams, your tail end Charlie. Rodriguez and Thompson, stay in the middle where I can coordinate with both of you. Standard patrol formation, 20-meter intervals, noise discipline is critical. Jackson nodded and moved out, his rifle ready and his eyes scanning the terrain ahead through his night vision scope. The rest of us followed at the prescribed intervals, each soldier responsible for watching a sector of our surroundings. The terrain was brutal. Afghanistan doesn't make anything easy, and this particular part of the Kunar Valley was all loose rock, steep slopes, and hidden crevices that could break an ankle or worse. We were carrying heavy loads, moving at night, and trying to maintain both speed and stealth. After 20 minutes of movement, we'd covered about 800 meters and descended into a narrow valley that would provide concealment from observation, but also limited our own visibility. That's when Thompson held up his hand and pointed to his radio. He'd picked up something. I moved up to his position. What do you have? Voices, Sergeant Major. About 400 meters ahead, maybe a little to the right. Sounds like multiple individuals, and they're not trying to be quiet. I activated my own night vision and scanned the area Thompson had indicated. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, movement. A brief flash of light, someone using a flashlight without proper light discipline, then another flash and another. Contact, I whispered into my radio. Multiple individuals, approximately 400 meters northeast of our position. Appears to be a search party. Jackson's voice came back immediately. I count at least 6, maybe 8 individuals. They're spread out in a line formation, moving slowly, searching the ground. This was both good news and bad news. Good news, they were still searching, which meant they hadn't found Morrison yet. Bad news, they were between us and Morrison's position, and they were conducting a professional search that would eventually locate him if we didn't intervene. I made a command decision. We're going to bypass them. Jackson, plot a route that takes us around their left flank, but keep us within striking distance if we need to create a distraction. For the next 45 minutes, we played a deadly game of cat and mouse. The search party was methodical, but not particularly skilled at night movement. They were using too much light, talking too much, and moving in predictable patterns. We were able to shadow them from a distance while gradually working our way around their position. But then Thompson got a signal on his radio. "Sergeant Major, I've got Midnight Eagle back on frequency." I took the headset. "Midnight Eagle, this is Rescue 1 Actual. What's your status?" Morrison's voice was weaker than before, and I could hear pain in every word. "Rescue 1 Actual. They're close. Really close. I can see their lights, and I think they're maybe 50 meters from my position. I don't think I can stay hidden much longer." My mind raced through the tactical situation. Morrison was running out of time, but if we moved directly toward his position, we'd run straight into the search party. We needed a diversion. "Williams," I whispered, "how much C4 did you bring?" He grinned in the darkness. "Enough to make some noise, Sergeant Major. What did you have in mind?" I pointed toward a rock formation about 600 meters to our south. "Think you can place a charge over there with a timer, something that will make a big bang and draw their attention away from Morrison? Give me 10 minutes, and I can make it sound like World War III just started." "Do it. Set the timer for 15 minutes. That should give us enough time to reach Morrison's position while they're investigating the explosion." Williams slipped away into the darkness with the silent movement that made him so effective at his job. The rest of us continued moving toward Morrison's position, but now we were racing against the clock in a completely different way. 12 minutes later, Thompson re-established contact with Morrison. "Midnight Eagle, this is Rescue 1. We are approximately 200 meters from your position. In 3 minutes, you're going to hear an explosion to the south. When that happens, the search party should move toward the sound. That's our window to reach you." "Roger. Rescue 1. I understand. I'm ready." At exactly 15 minutes, Williams's diversion went off. The explosion lit up the night sky and echoed off the mountains like thunder. Immediately, we could see the search party's lights turning toward the sound, and we could hear shouting and vehicle engines starting up. "Move!" I commanded, and we broke from concealment and began moving rapidly toward Morrison's position. Jackson reached him first. "Got him," came his voice over the radio. "He's conscious but in bad shape." When I reached Morrison's hiding spot, a small depression between 2 large rocks, I could see immediately that Rodriguez was going to have her work cut out for her. Captain Morrison was pale, obviously in shock, and his left leg was twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn, but his eyes were alert, and when he saw us approaching, he managed a weak smile. "Sergeant Major Steve Harris, I presume?" "That's right, Captain. Sorry we're late to the party. Rodriguez, get to work on that leg." Rodriguez was already breaking out her medical supplies. "This is going to hurt, Captain. The bone is protruding through the skin, and I need to stabilize it before we can move you." Morrison gritted his teeth. "Do what you have to do, Doc. I've been through worse." I seriously doubted that, but I admired his spirit. While Rodriguez worked on Morrison's injuries, Thompson was monitoring radio traffic and trying to track the movements of the search party that had responded to Williams' diversion. "Sergeant Major, the diversion worked, but not as well as we'd hoped. About half the search party moved toward the explosion, but the other half stayed in this area, and they're starting to move back toward our position. Stay tuned because what happened next will shock you." The rescue was far from over, and we were about to face our biggest challenge yet. Rodriguez worked on Morrison's leg with the focused intensity that separated combat medics from regular medical personnel. She'd seen injuries like this before, and she knew that every second counted. While she applied a field splint and administered morphine for the pain, I was calculating our next moves. "How long until he's stable enough to move?" I asked Rodriguez. 5 more minutes for the splint, then we can transport him. But Sergeant Major, he's lost a lot of blood, and that compound fracture is going to make him scream if we're not careful about how we carry him. Morrison, despite the morphine starting to take effect, was still tracking our conversation. "Don't worry about me screaming, Sergeant Major. I'll bite my tongue off before I compromise your mission." That's the kind of attitude that makes military aviation the elite force it is. Morrison knew that any sound could give away our position, and he was prepared to endure incredible pain to protect the rest of us. Thompson held up his hand for attention. Movement coming back toward our position, multiple contacts, approximately 300 meters south and closing. I grabbed my night vision binoculars and scanned the area Thompson indicated. Sure enough, I could see at least 4 individuals moving in our direction with tactical flashlights and what appeared to be AK-47 rifles. They weren't rushing, but they weren't being casual either. This was a professional search pattern. "Jackson, what's your assessment of our route to the extraction point?" Jackson had been studying the terrain through his rifle scope. "It's going to be tough, Sergeant Major. We've got about 2.5 kilometers of rough ground, and at least part of it is going to be exposed ridgeline. With Captain Morrison injured, we're looking at maybe 90 minutes to 2 hours of movement time." That was the math I'd been dreading. Our extraction window opened at 0500 hours, and it was currently 0237. Even if we started moving immediately, we'd be cutting it close, and that was assuming we didn't run into any more enemy contacts. "Rodriguez, time check." 30 seconds, Sergeant Major. The splint is secure, but he's going to need real medical attention as soon as we get back to base. Williams rejoined our group, having completed his reconnaissance of the area around his diversion. The explosion drew most of them away, but they're organized. They've got radio communication, and they're coordinating their search. I counted at least 12 individuals total, and they've got at least 2 vehicles providing mobile support. This was escalating beyond what our intelligence had suggested. Instead of a handful of Taliban fighters conducting a casual search, we were dealing with a coordinated force that had resources and knew how to use them. "All right, people, here's what we're going to do. Rodriguez, you and Thompson are going to carry Morrison using the 2-man stretcher technique. Jackson, you maintain overwatch and early warning. Williams, you're going to help me with rearguard security. We move in tactical formation, noise discipline is critical, and we stop for nothing until we reach the extraction point." I looked directly at Morrison. "Captain, I know you're in pain, but I need you to understand something. The next 2 hours are going to be the longest of your life. We're going to carry you through some of the roughest terrain in Afghanistan, and there might be times when we have to move fast or take cover quickly. Can you handle that?" Morrison's voice was steady, despite the morphine and the trauma he'd endured. "Sergeant Major, I've been sitting in this hole for 6 hours, listening to enemy forces get closer and closer, knowing that my only hope was that some crazy special operations soldiers would risk their lives to come get me. Now you're here. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it." That's when I knew we had a chance. Morrison wasn't just a pilot who'd gotten shot down. He was a soldier who understood what it meant to be part of a team. Rodriguez and Thompson rigged the portable stretcher and carefully transferred Morrison onto it. Even with the morphine, moving him caused obvious pain, but he kept his mouth shut and his eyes focused on staying alert. We began moving toward the extraction point at 0245 hours. The first 500 meters were the most dangerous because we were still close to the search parties, but the terrain provided good concealment. Rodriguez and Thompson developed a rhythm carrying Morrison, switching positions every 10 minutes to prevent fatigue. That's when Thompson picked up radio traffic that changed everything. "Sergeant Major, I'm intercepting enemy communications. They're speaking Pashto, but I'm picking up enough to understand that they've found Morrison's original hiding spot. They know we were there. This meant our grace period was over. Instead of searching randomly, they now knew that American forces were in the area conducting a rescue operation. They'd start expanding their search in all directions, and they'd bring in more resources." "What kind of resources are we talking about?" I asked. "Hard to tell from the radio chatter, but it sounds like they're calling for additional vehicles and possibly helicopter support." Enemy helicopter support was a nightmare scenario. We had no surface-to-air missiles, limited anti-aircraft capabilities, and we'd be completely exposed on the mountain ridges. If they brought in helicopters with searchlights and door gunners, this rescue mission would turn into a running battle that we couldn't win. Jackson, who'd been monitoring our route ahead, came back with more bad news. "Sergeant Major, I've got vehicle lights approximately 1 kilometer ahead on the main valley road. Looks like they're setting up some kind of checkpoint or roadblock." I consulted my map and GPS coordinates. The vehicle checkpoint was directly between us and our extraction point. We could try to go around it, but that would add at least 45 minutes to our movement time, and we couldn't afford the delay. "Williams, what kind of firepower are you carrying?" "Standard loadout plus the SAW and about 600 rounds of linked ammunition. I've also got 4 fragmentation grenades and 2 smoke grenades." "Think you can create enough confusion to get us past that checkpoint?" Williams studied the terrain between our position and the vehicle lights. "Maybe. If I can get to that high ground over there," he pointed to a rocky outcrop about 300 meters to our east. "I could lay down suppressing fire that would keep their heads down while you move around the left flank." It was risky, but it might work. The alternative was to try the long route and risk missing our extraction window entirely. "Do it. Give us 10 minutes to get into position, then light them up. Make it loud and make it convincing, but don't get yourself killed. We'll rendezvous at Checkpoint Alpha in 30 minutes. Williams nodded and began moving toward his firing position with that quiet confidence that made him so effective in combat. The rest of us continued toward the enemy checkpoint, but now we were committed to a firefight. The next few minutes felt like hours. Rodriguez and Thompson continued carrying Morrison, who remained conscious but was obviously weakening from blood loss and shock. Jackson moved ahead as point man, using his night vision scope to identify threats and safe routes. I coordinated between all team members while constantly checking our position and timing. At exactly 10 minutes, Williams opened fire. The sound of his M249 squad automatic weapon echoed off the mountains like rolling thunder. Tracer rounds lit up the night sky, and I could hear return fire from multiple weapons as the enemy checkpoint responded to his attack. Williams was putting on a convincing display, making it sound like a much larger force was engaging them. "Move, move, move!" I commanded, and we began our flanking maneuver around the left side of the checkpoint. The plan was working. The enemy soldiers were focused on Williams's position, returning fire and calling for backup. They weren't watching for a small team carrying a wounded pilot moving through the rocks 500 meters to their south. But that's when Murphy's Law kicked in. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Thompson, who was carrying the rear of Morrison's stretcher, stepped into a hidden crevice between 2 rocks. He didn't fall completely, but his ankle twisted badly enough that he went down hard, and Morrison's stretcher tilted at a dangerous angle. "Contact rear!" Jackson's voice came through my earpiece, and I spun around to see muzzle flashes from behind us. The search party that had been tracking us had caught up, and they were engaging us from about 200 meters away. Now we were caught between 2 enemy forces, the checkpoint ahead of us and the pursuit team behind us. Morrison was wounded and unable to move on his own. Thompson was injured and having trouble walking. Williams was separated from us and engaged in his own firefight. And we had less than 2 hours to reach our extraction point. I want you to drop a comment below and tell me what you think is going to happen next, because this operation took a turn that none of us saw coming. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss military stories like this one, and hit that like button if you're enjoying this real combat experience. Rodriguez immediately took charge of the medical situation. She helped Thompson to his feet while maintaining her grip on Morrison's stretcher. Thompson's ankle is sprained, but he can still move. Morrison's condition is stable, but he needs to get to a hospital soon. Jackson had taken cover behind a large boulder and was returning precision fire at the pursuit team. I count 6 hostiles spread out in a skirmish line. They're using fire and movement tactics. These aren't amateur fighters. This confirmed what we'd suspected. We weren't dealing with local Taliban fighters who'd stumbled across a crashed airplane. This was an organized unit with training and equipment, and they'd been waiting for an opportunity like this. I made a tactical decision that 25 years of experience told me was our only chance. Jackson, keep them pinned down. Rodriguez, you're going to have to carry Morrison by yourself for the next few minutes. Thompson, can you walk? I can walk, Sergeant Major, but I can't carry the stretcher. Then you're going to provide covering fire with Jackson. Williams, if you can hear me, we need immediate extraction from your position. Move to checkpoint Alpha when you can break contact. I grabbed the front handles of Morrison's stretcher, and Rodriguez took the rear. Morrison looked up at me with eyes that showed both pain and determination. Sergeant Major, leave me here. Take the rest of your team and get out. I'm slowing you down, and you're all going to get killed because of me. And that's the moment when military values and personal character get tested under the worst possible circumstances. Morrison was making a rational argument. From a purely tactical standpoint, leaving him behind would give the rest of us a much better chance of survival. But that's not how American soldiers operate. Captain, we've been having this conversation for about 6 hours now, and my answer hasn't changed. We don't leave people behind. Period. End of discussion. Rodriguez and I started moving with Morrison between us, while Jackson and Thompson provided covering fire. The weight of a full-grown man plus military equipment was significant, but adrenaline and training took over. We covered the next 300 meters in about 8 minutes, moving from cover to cover while bullets cracked over our heads. That's when Williams' voice came through the radio, with news that gave me hope for the first time in hours. Rescue 1 actual. This is Williams. I've broken contact and I'm moving to checkpoint Alpha, but I've got visual on helicopter lights to the south. Looks like our ride might be coming early. I checked my watch. It was 0347 hours, more than an hour before our scheduled extraction window. If those were our Black Hawks coming in early, it meant someone back at base had been monitoring our situation and decided we needed immediate support. Thompson confirmed the helicopter contact. Rescue 1 actual. I've got radio contact with Falcon 2-7. That's our extraction bird, and they're requesting our current position and condition. I grabbed Thompson's radio. Falcon 2-7, this is Rescue 1 actual. We have recovered Midnight Eagle, but he requires immediate medical evacuation. We are currently at coordinates 347911278, taking contact from multiple enemy positions. Request immediate extraction. The pilot's voice came back immediately. Rescue 1 actual, roger. We have your position marked and we're inbound. Be advised, we're showing multiple hostile contacts in your area. Can you secure a landing zone? That was the million-dollar question. We were caught between 2 enemy forces, carrying a wounded pilot, with 1 team member injured, and we needed to secure enough open ground for a Black Hawk to land safely. I looked at the terrain around us and spotted a small clearing about 200 meters to our northeast. It was exposed, but it was the only option. Rodriguez, we're going to have to make a run for that clearing. It's our only shot. She nodded without hesitation. Let's do it. The next few minutes were pure chaos. Rodriguez and I carried Morrison as fast as we could move, while Jackson and Thompson bounded backwards, providing covering fire as we moved toward the landing zone. Williams rejoined us just as we reached the edge of the clearing, and his additional firepower helped suppress the enemy pursuit team. But the checkpoint force had also figured out what we were doing, and they were moving to intercept us at the landing zone. Falcon 2-7, this is Rescue 1 Actual. Landing zone is hot. Repeat, landing zone is hot. Multiple hostiles converging on extraction point. Roger, Rescue 1 Actual. We're coming in anyway. Mark your position with IR strobe. Nay, I activated my infrared strobe light, which would be visible to the helicopter crew through their night vision systems, but invisible to enemy forces who didn't have night vision capability. The sound of the Black Hawk approaching was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in hours, but it also meant we were committed. There was no backup plan, no alternative extraction point, no second chances. This was it. The Black Hawk came in fast and low, its rotor wash kicking up dust and debris as it approached our makeshift landing zone. Through my night vision, I could see the crew chief in the door with his machine gun ready, scanning for threats while the pilots fought to bring the aircraft down in a tight space under enemy fire. But that's when the situation went from dangerous to desperate. RPG! RPG! Jackson's voice cut through the radio static as he spotted the telltale signature of a rocket-propelled grenade being fired from the checkpoint position. The RPG streaked across the night sky like a deadly meteor, passing just behind the Black Hawk's tail rotor. If the pilot hadn't been pulling in power to land at that exact moment, the grenade would have taken out our ride home and probably killed us all in the explosion. Falcon 2-7 taking RPG fire from the north. Can you stay on station? Chief Warrant Officer Chen's voice came back immediately, calm and professional despite the fact that someone had just tried to blow her aircraft out of the sky. Negative on extended loiter, Rescue 1. We've got about 30 seconds on the ground before we have to pull pitch. Get your people loaded now. 30 seconds. In the civilian world, 30 seconds is barely enough time to tie your shoes. In combat, 30 seconds can feel like a lifetime or pass in the blink of an eye, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Rodriguez and I reached the Black Hawk first, carrying Morrison between us. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Martinez, grabbed Morrison's stretcher and helped pull him into the aircraft. Even with the morphine, Morrison was conscious enough to help by grabbing onto the aircraft's cargo hooks and pulling himself up. "Thompson, Williams, Jackson, move your asses!" I shouted over the rotor noise. Thompson was limping badly on his sprained ankle, but Williams had grabbed his arm and was helping him toward the aircraft. Jackson was still providing covering fire, his rifle cracking steadily as he engaged targets that were trying to get close enough for accurate shots at the helicopter. That's when I heard the sound that every ground soldier dreads, the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. The first mortar round impacted about 50 meters from our position, close enough to shower us with rocks and dirt, but not close enough to cause casualties. The second round was closer, maybe 30 meters, and I could feel the concussion through the ground. "They've got our range," Williams shouted as he reached the helicopter. "Third round is going to be right on target." Mortar crews use a technique called bracketing. They fire one round long, one round short, then adjust to hit directly on target with the third round. It's simple, effective, and deadly. Jackson reached the helicopter just as I heard the distinctive thump of the third mortar round leaving its tube. We had maybe 8 seconds before impact. "Everybody in! Go, go, go!" I literally threw Jackson into the aircraft and dove in after him just as Chen pulled power and lifted off. The mortar round exploded exactly where the helicopter had been sitting 3 seconds earlier, close enough that shrapnel rattled off the aircraft's armored belly. But we weren't clear yet. As the Black Hawk gained altitude and began moving away from the landing zone, I could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions on the ground. The enemy had brought in more fighters, and they were trying to bring us down with concentrated small arms fire. "Taking hits in the cabin!" Martinez shouted from his position at the door gun. I looked around and saw several bullet holes in the aircraft's skin, but nothing that appeared to have hit anything critical. Rodriguez was already working on Morrison again, checking his vital signs and adjusting his IV line. The helicopter ride was rough, and I could see that the constant movement was taking a toll on his injuries. "How's he doing?" I asked Rodriguez. "Blood pressure is dropping, and he's lost more blood than I thought. We need to get him to a surgical team fast." Thompson was monitoring radio communications with base, coordinating our return and medical support for Morrison. Rescue 1 Actual base is requesting full mission debrief upon return, and they've got a surgical team standing by at the landing pad. Williams was conducting a weapons check, making sure all our equipment was accounted for and that nobody had been hit during the extraction. "Everybody's accounted for, Sergeant Major. No friendly casualties except for Thompson's ankle and Morrison's original injuries." Jackson was still watching the ground through his rifle scope, making sure we weren't being followed or targeted by additional threats. "Looks like we're clear. No pursuit aircraft, no additional ground fire." As the adrenaline began to subside, I allowed myself to feel a moment of satisfaction. We'd successfully extracted Captain Morrison from a situation that had seemed impossible just a few hours earlier. But I also knew that this mission had been far more complex and dangerous than our initial intelligence had suggested. Chief Warrant Officer Chen's voice came through the intercom. "Rescue 1 Actual. ETA to base is 12 minutes. Medical team is standing by, and the Colonel wants to debrief you immediately upon landing." I acknowledged, and then took a moment to really look at Morrison. Despite everything he'd been through, the aircraft crash, the ejection injuries, 6 hours on the ground in enemy territory, the pain and blood loss, and the dangerous extraction, he was conscious and alert. "How you doing, Captain?" I asked him. Morrison looked up at me with eyes that showed exhaustion, but also gratitude. "Sergeant Major, I don't know how to thank you and your team. When I heard that F-16 engines start to fail, and I knew I was going down in hostile territory, I honestly didn't think I was going to make it home. That's the moment that makes all the training, all the risks, all the sleepless nights and dangerous missions worthwhile. Morrison was somebody's son, maybe somebody's husband or father. Because 5 soldiers were willing to risk their lives, he was going to go home to his family instead of becoming a casualty statistic or a prisoner of war. Captain, you don't need to thank us. This is what we do. But I want you to understand something. You're alive right now because you kept your head, followed your training, and stayed strong when everything went to hell. A lot of pilots in your situation would have panicked or given up. You didn't." Rodriguez looked up from her medical equipment. "His vital signs are stabilizing, the IV fluids are helping with the blood loss, and the morphine is managing his pain effectively. He's going to be fine." As we approached our forward operating base, I could see the medical team waiting at the landing pad with a stretcher and emergency equipment. The base's floodlights were illuminated, creating a stark contrast with the darkness we'd been operating in for the past 6 hours. The Black Hawk touched down smoothly, and within seconds the medical team had Morrison loaded onto a proper stretcher and was moving him toward the medical facility. Rodriguez went with them to provide continuity of care and brief the doctors on his injuries and treatment. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the base commander, not the pilot, was waiting for my team as we offloaded our equipment from the helicopter. "Steve, how did it go out there?" I gave him the short version first. "Successful extraction of the pilot with no friendly casualties. But Colonel, we ran into a lot more resistance than intelligence suggested we would. This wasn't a random Taliban patrol that happened to hear the crash. This was an organized force with communications, heavy weapons, and tactical coordination." Morrison nodded grimly. "That matches what we're hearing from other sectors. Intelligence suggests the Taliban have been preparing for exactly this kind of situation, American aircraft going down in their territory. They've been pre-positioning resources and training teams specifically for pilot capture operations." This was sobering information. It meant that future rescue missions were going to be even more dangerous and complex than tonight's operation. "What's the status on Captain Morrison?" "The doctors say he's going to make a full recovery. The compound fracture will require surgery and several months of rehabilitation, but there's no permanent damage. He'll be flying again within a year. That was the best news I'd heard all night. After the formal debriefing, which took about 2 hours and covered every detail of the mission from insertion to extraction, I finally had a chance to sit down with my team and decompress from what we'd just experienced. Thompson's ankle had been x-rayed and bandaged, a moderate sprain that would keep him off operations for about 2 weeks. Rodriguez had already written her medical report and was preparing supplies for the next potential casualty. Williams was cleaning his weapons and restocking ammunition. Jackson was updating his rifle scope and reviewing lessons learned from the mission. Subscribe to this channel and make sure you hit that notification bell, because every story I tell you comes from real experience during my 25 years in the Army. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought about this rescue mission, and don't forget to like this video if these military stories interest you. Looking back on Operation Midnight Eagle, I realized it represented everything that military service is really about. It's not about the glory or recognition. Most of what we do never gets reported in newspapers or talked about on television. It's about the commitment to never leave a fellow service member behind, regardless of the risks involved. Captain Morrison went on to make a full recovery and returned to flying combat missions. Thompson's ankle healed completely, and he continued to serve as our communications specialist for the rest of that deployment. Rodriguez received a commendation for her medical care under fire. Williams and Jackson both received recognition for their tactical performance during the extraction. But the real victory wasn't the awards or recognition. The real victory was that 5 soldiers worked together as a team to bring home a fellow American who was in trouble. That's the standard we hold ourselves to in the military, and it's a standard that has never changed regardless of where we serve or what conflicts we face. The helicopter pilots, Chen and Davis, later told me that our extraction was one of the most challenging they'd ever attempted. Landing in a hot landing zone under mortar fire while taking small arms fire from multiple directions is not something they teach in flight school. But they stayed on station and got us out because that's what the mission required. Operation Midnight Eagle lasted approximately 6.5 hours from the time we received the initial distress call until Captain Morrison was in surgery at our base medical facility. In that time, we traveled over 30 kilometers through hostile territory, engaged multiple enemy forces, conducted medical treatment under fire, and successfully extracted a wounded pilot who would have otherwise been captured or killed. But more than that, it demonstrated the effectiveness of small unit tactics, the importance of thorough training, and the value of soldiers who trust each other completely. Rodriguez knew I would make the right tactical decisions. I knew Jackson would provide accurate covering fire when we needed it. Thompson knew Williams would create effective diversions. Williams knew Rodriguez could keep Morrison alive under the worst conditions. That level of trust and competence doesn't happen by accident. It comes from years of training together, deploying together, and facing challenges that test every aspect of your military skills and personal character. 3 days after Operation Midnight Eagle, I received a message that Captain Morrison wanted to see me before he was medically evacuated to Germany for surgery. I found him in the base medical facility, his leg in traction but his spirits remarkably high for someone who'd been through what he'd experienced. "Sergeant Major Harris," he said as I walked into his room, "I wanted to thank you personally before they shipped me out of here." I pulled up a chair next to his bed. "How are you feeling, Captain?" "Like I got hit by a truck but alive. The doctors say I'm going to make a full recovery and I'll be back to flying within 8 months. He paused and I could see he was struggling with something. "Sergeant Major, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "When you guys were planning that rescue mission, did you ever consider that it might not work? That you might not be able to get me out?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Captain, every mission involves risk assessment. We knew the odds weren't great. Hostile territory, unknown enemy strength. your injuries, weather conditions, limited extraction windows. Any one of those factors could have made the mission impossible. Then why did you do it? I looked at this young pilot who'd put his life on the line flying missions to support ground troops like my team, and I realized he was asking about something much bigger than just one rescue operation. Because that's who we are. In the civilian world, people make cost-benefit analyses about everything. Is it worth the risk? What are the chances of success? How much will it cost? In the military, when one of our people is in trouble, we don't do math problems. We do whatever it takes to bring them home. Morrison nodded slowly. I want you to know something, Sergeant Major. When I was sitting in that hole listening to enemy voices getting closer, I never doubted that someone would come for me. Not because I'm special, not because I'm a pilot, but because I wear the same uniform you do. That conversation stayed with me for the rest of my military career. Morrison understood something that not everyone grasps about military service. It's not just a job or even a profession. It's a commitment to a set of values that are bigger than any individual person. 2 weeks later, I received word that Captain Morrison had successfully undergone surgery in Germany and was beginning rehabilitation. 6 months after that, I got a letter from him saying he'd been cleared to return to flight status and was back in the cockpit of an F-16. But Operation Midnight Eagle had implications that went far beyond one successful rescue mission. The intelligence we'd gathered about enemy tactics and capabilities helped improve planning for future operations. The lessons we learned about communication difficulties in mountainous terrain led to equipment upgrades for other special operations teams. The medical procedures Rodriguez used to treat Morrison's injuries became part of the training curriculum for combat medics. That's how the military learns and adapts. Every mission, whether successful or not, provides information that makes the next mission more likely to succeed. Williams, our demolitions specialist, went on to become an instructor at the Army's Explosives Ordnance Disposal School, where he taught other soldiers how to create effective diversions under combat conditions. The techniques he used during our mission became part of the standard curriculum. Thompson continued serving as a communications specialist and eventually became a warrant officer, specializing in battlefield communication systems. His experience with radio dead zones and signal boosting during our mission contributed to improvements in field communication equipment. Jackson remained with special operations units for the rest of his military career, participating in dozens of missions where his marksmanship and tactical skills made the difference between success and failure. He never talked much about his service, but other soldiers who served with him knew they could count on him when things got tough. Rodriguez eventually became a physician assistant, but she never lost her edge as a combat medic. She deployed multiple times and saved countless lives using the same calm professionalism she'd shown during Morrison's treatment. Her medical report from Operation Midnight Eagle became a case study in treating traumatic injuries under combat conditions. As for me, I continued serving for another 8 years after that deployment, participating in operations throughout the Middle East and training the next generation of soldiers who would carry on the traditions of military service. But Operation Midnight Eagle remained one of the missions I was most proud of, not because of any individual heroics, but because it demonstrated what American soldiers can accomplish when they work together toward a common goal. Now, years after retiring from active duty, I look back on that night in Afghanistan and I see it as a perfect example of what military service really means. It's not about the equipment or the tactics or even the training, although all of those things are important. It's about the willingness to risk everything for people you might not even know personally, simply because they wear the same uniform and serve the same country. Captain Morrison and I stayed in touch for several years after the war. He went on to become a squadron commander and eventually made lieutenant colonel before transitioning to civilian life. He now works as a commercial airline pilot and he's married with 2 kids. Every year on the anniversary of Operation Midnight Eagle, he sends me a message, thanking my team for giving him the chance to come home and build a life with his family. But here's what Morrison never fully understood. He thanked us, but we should have been thanking him. Every time he climbed into that F-16 and flew missions over hostile territory, he was putting his life on the line to provide air support for soldiers on the ground. Pilots like Morrison are the reason ground troops like my team could operate effectively in dangerous areas. That's the thing about military service that civilians sometimes don't grasp. It's all interconnected. The pilot depends on the ground troops for intelligence and target identification. The ground troops depend on the pilot for air support and reconnaissance. The medic depends on the communications specialist to call for medical evacuation. The communications specialist depends on the demolitions expert to clear obstacles and create diversions. Everyone depends on everyone else, and the whole system only works when every individual is committed to something bigger than their own personal safety or comfort. The equipment we used during Operation Midnight Eagle, the night vision goggles, the radios, the helicopters, the medical supplies, was all important. But equipment doesn't complete missions. People complete missions. Specifically, people who have trained together, trust each other completely, and share a commitment to values that don't change based on circumstances. I've told this story to audiences of veterans, active duty soldiers, and civilians. And I always get asked the same question, weren't you scared? Of course we were scared. Fear is a natural human response to dangerous situations. And anyone who says they're never scared in combat is either lying or they're missing some important survival instincts. But being scared and being paralyzed by fear are two different things. Professional soldiers learn to acknowledge fear, process it, and then set it aside to focus on the mission. That's not because we're somehow braver than other people. It's because we've trained extensively to operate effectively under stress, and we know that our teammates are depending on us to do our jobs. During Operation Midnight Eagle, there were several moments when I was genuinely unsure whether we'd be able to complete the mission successfully. When we discovered that enemy forces were closer to Morrison than we'd expected, when Thompson injured his ankle, when we got caught between two enemy forces during the extraction, all of those were moments when the smart thing to do might have been to abort the mission and try again another night. But aborting wasn't an option because Morrison couldn't survive another night. His injuries were too severe, his exposure to the elements was too prolonged, and the enemy search was too intensive. It was now or never, and that meant we had to find ways to overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. That's when training and experience become more important than equipment or numerical superiority. Rodriguez knew how to treat traumatic injuries with limited supplies under combat conditions because she'd practiced those procedures hundreds of times. Williams knew how to create effective diversions because he understood explosives and enemy psychology. Jackson knew how to provide precision fire support because he'd spent countless hours on shooting ranges, perfecting his marksmanship. But most importantly, we all knew how to function as a team under extreme stress because we'd trained together and deployed together. We knew each other's capabilities, limitations, and decision-making patterns. That kind of unit cohesion doesn't happen overnight. It develops over months and years of shared experiences. Military service teaches you that individual heroics make good movies, but teamwork wins battles. During Operation Midnight Eagle, there were no individual heroes. There were 5 soldiers who did their jobs professionally under extremely difficult conditions. And there were helicopter pilots who risked their aircraft and their lives to support the mission. The enemy forces we encountered that night were also professionals. They had training, equipment, and tactical knowledge. They used sound military tactics like bracketing fires with mortars, coordinated search patterns, and combined arms operations with vehicles and infantry working together. The difference wasn't that we were better soldiers than they were. The difference was that we had better training, better equipment, and most importantly, we were fighting for something we believed in. Every day on this channel, I share stories like Operation Midnight Eagle, because I want people to understand what military service really involves. It's not about politics or foreign policy debates. Those decisions are made by elected officials who are accountable to the American people. Military service is about commitment to your fellow soldiers and to values like duty, honor, and country that transcend individual concerns. If you've enjoyed hearing about this mission, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future stories. Leave a comment and let me know if you're a veteran yourself or if you have family members who've served. And please share these stories with people who might benefit from understanding what military service involves. Looking back on 25 years of military service, from my first deployment as a young soldier to my retirement as a sergeant major, I can honestly say that Operation Midnight Eagle represents everything I'm proud of about American military personnel. Not because it was the most complex mission or the most dangerous situation, but because it demonstrated the values and professionalism that define military service. Captain Morrison went home to his family because 5 soldiers were willing to risk their lives for someone they'd never met. But more than that, he went home because the United States military has created a culture where leaving people behind is simply not acceptable, regardless of the risks involved. That's the standard we hold ourselves to, and it's a standard that has never wavered in more than 2 centuries of American military history. Whether it was Marines fighting on Iwo Jima in World War II, soldiers in the frozen mountains of Korea, helicopter crews in the jungles of Vietnam, or special operations teams in the deserts of Iraq and Afghanistan, the commitment remains the same. We don't leave people behind. Not ever, not for any reason. And that's why Operation Midnight Eagle succeeded. And that's why I'm proud to have served with soldiers like Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, and Jackson, who understood what that commitment means. Thank you for watching, and remember, freedom isn't free. It's protected by people who are willing to risk everything for others, often people they'll never meet. That's what makes military service special, and that's what makes America worth defending.